Welcome to Minerva, a monthly show where we discuss the mysteries. We hope to give you enough information that you can go away and do your own study. I'd like to introduce my co-host, Duncan.
Hello.
And we're going to be discussing the mystery of Rennes le Chateau. Now, this is part 2, so if you haven't seen part 1, please go and find that because there's lots of relevant information there, and we're just going to carry on our discussion, essentially.
Yep.
So, we left off talking about the bloodline of Jesus through the book, The Holy Blood, Holy Grail. When that book was released, it was a phenomenon.
Yeah.
It was a bestseller. I mean, I was only 1 at the time, but I've read the history. It was a bestseller, and it did incredibly well. It even reached newspaper coverage. Yeah. You know, there was a lot about this, and essentially that was because of this bloodline theory.
Yeah,
people started to discuss and talk about the fact that there could be a bloodline or a descent line from Jesus Christ.
Yeah, very much so, and it was beautifully linked in with existing literature. I think the first step, though, as you create something, is the Grail legends.
Yep.
Famous for their own concepts of being mysterious. So you got people looking for the physical Grail or the metaphysical Grail. But in the earliest story of it, which is Christian de Troyes, which is also written in the same area as Renne le Chateau.
Yeah.
The Grail is in the original text is called Saint Graal, which people have just phonetically, you get the San and the Grail, and the Grail is hung on, but it's written in the Latin. But if you separate from the G to the R, you get Saint Graal, which is blood royal, or royal blood, I should say.
Yeah.
And so they're linking in this concept that the Grail itself is a bloodline.
Yes.
And that's linking into Renne le Chateau and the concept that Christ, his descendants, survived and have something to do with Renne le Chateau.
Yeah, and we go back to the Priory of Zion, which, you know, within those genealogies say that there is this bloodline of descent. And there are lots of different people that have talked about this. But I think the first place that we hear about this, and certainly the place with some evidence towards a bloodline, is Santa Maria della Mer, which is not that far from Renne le Chateau, not particularly close, but it's not that far. But essentially, the story and the legend is that Mary Magdalene came over on a boat with some other people, one of which being a lady called Sarah, a young girl called Sarah, who could have potentially have been the child of Christ.
Yeah.
Sarah in Hebrew means princess. So, and I know we've gone backwards and forwards on that.
You're preempting this.
I am preempting slightly, but, you know, Sarah meaning princess does mean, or at least shows that this could have been, you know, a royal princess of some description, or a bloodline princess. And she comes ashore into France and then lives her life. Mary Magdalene lives the rest of her life out in that region. Yeah, in the same region as Renne le Chateau.
I mean, there is a famous procession there, isn't there, where there's meant to be the skull that goes through.
Yeah, and they still do that to this day.
Yeah. I mean, I know this is going to make me incredibly unpopular because there's so much that goes in with the sacred feminine and Mary Magdalene, other area, and there's so much passion behind this idea. And especially in this day and age, to say anything that could be remotely seen as anti-feminism is a bad thing. But from a concept of belief for this story, I do not see it. Right. I mean, like when you have this concept of Sarah means princess. My name, Duncan, means brown warrior.
Right.
I am neither a warrior, neither am I brown. And so the relationship to a name and a person, yes, it can be linked. I mean, there's a reason why I'm called Duncan, but it's got nothing to do with any prowess or skin colour.
No.
But it's not just simply that. I can't hold the credence for the whole thing that goes through that would be the reason. Because I think we so often forget the initiating point. The reason we're looking at this is because a priest basically became immensely wealthy and started building things.
That's true.
So the question is, how does he get this money from the possibility of a descendant of Christ living or been near his church?
One of the popular theories on that, I think, that people have said is that he finds these parchments that could have been early Gospels. You know, they could have been something that scared the church. There could have been some documentation in which he took to the church and they said, oh, you know, he's found something here. We don't want this getting out, so we're going to pay him off. And in being paid off, he then decides to live his life in a reasonably wealthy way and building the water tower to help the people in his area, and also renovating the church into a beautiful way. And in that church, he does leave some slight clues as well, which we can get onto. But, you know, was he paid off? Potentially. There's a story which I don't know the evidence for, but it's certainly in the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, that when he finds the parchments, he travels from Rennes le Chateau to Paris. He goes to Paris, he passes these parchments on to somebody who can read Old French, and they then decipher what's on these parchments and realise that there's a secret, and that's where this kind of buyout comes, where the church say, oh no, we can't, you know, we need to pay this guy off. He's also said to, when he's there, bought some famous paintings, which again we'll go into later. But that part of the story I've never really been able to find the right evidence for. But if he did do that, that does lead on to the fact that maybe that's how he earned some money from the Bloodline story.
Well, yeah, I mean, to cover most of those points, again, I've wanted to know about that journey to, because he was meant to see his bishop, isn't it? The bishop was meant to have paid for him to go down and do it. Yeah. Again, there is a possibility. We know that so much has been added to the story that even to that story could have had something added to it. The one part that I think has been proven quite conclusively is they give a list of the paintings he was meant to have got, and they've gone through the records of the Louvre where he's meant to have bought them, and there's no record. They hold fastidious on their records, and there's no records of these ones being purchased, which is a shame, because it'd be great to at least right, okay, he was there. But this concept of being paid off with the Vatican, now for a long time, I wouldn't agree with it, because for me, a sense of to have something, you would have to prove to the church that there was a threat. Yes. Would an Old Testament do it? And for a long time, I don't think it would be enough, because it's still just a piece of paper. But the more we see things of documents being discovered with the little nuances on, which have caused an issue, does give credence. And the other part is a church willing to pay people off. It's a scandalous thing, and it's unfortunate to bring it up, but to make sure, for want of a better word, academically we've covered. We know that there have been, let's just for politeness say, naughty priests in America.
Plenty.
And we now know that in I believe it was the 1980s, the families were paid off to keep quiet for the good of the church. Taking out any political correctness from that statement, we do have that concept that a church is willing to pay off for its integrity. So I cannot dismiss it completely.
Yeah, and I think it is one of the theories which does hold some water, but there's, again, very little evidence of it. Yeah. And that brings us on to the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the church and we're talking about the Catholic Church, and that's where Dan Brown, who is an author, he's an author of, I think it was his second or third book, but essentially this is kind of fact and fiction mixed in together.
Yeah.
It's, some of the writing has tremendous fact in it. You can read it and say, I can see where parts of that story is, and there's some realness to it. And I think that's what he does so well. He blends those two things, because then he adds pieces to pre-existing stories, which make them potentially more exciting. And Dan Brown wrote a book about the bloodline more than the Renne le Chateau mystery, but it sort of had that flavour, because Saunière was involved in the book that he wrote, but only I think as the caretaker or as someone very early in the story. It's a
adopted father sort of thing, very much down the line. It's like incidental to it. Yeah. But to me, the main credit that Dan Brown has to have is his, in the opening, even before the story starts, he says a statement in his book. And it's coming across as being one of the most misquoted statements I think ever written in literature. Because everyone says, he's saying this is true. He doesn't. All he says there are persons and organisations that are true. Yeah. there is a society called the Priory of Zion that does exist. Whether he doesn't say they do what they do in the book, he just says that society exists, and it does. He says that, and the Opitheists, they exist. Yes, they do. But everyone's taken it because they've said, that's true. Oh, it's all true. Mary Magdalene and etc. Bloodline.
Yeah, it's the blurred line between fact and fiction. I think that's what he did so well. And again, what had happened was you had the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, which had, brought a lot of researchers to this mystery. There was a huge community of people doing this. And it started to sort of quieten down a bit.
Yes.
And then the Da Vinci Code came, and the whole thing was just raked up again.
Yeah, definitely.
It really brought a lot of money to the local area. It made people that have been researching it for 20 years all of a sudden, reasonably important, and people wanted to go and hear them talk and hear their research and see what they were doing. And there are other books in between times as well from people like Clive Prince and Lynn Pinknett, who have come along and spoken at Minerva Talks.
Wonderful.
At our thing. And they wrote a great book, The Templar Revelation, which again is about Leonardo da Vinci and brings in these kind of theories of the bloodline and other things. And Dan Brown actually credits them more than he does the Holy Blood, Holy Grail with why he wrote this book, where he got his information from. And they were actually asked to be cameo parts in the film.
It's the bus bit, isn't it? Sitting on the bus.
Yeah. And I mean, we had great fun with them when they were telling us that story. And, that's great that he has the courage to sort of say, no, I took bits from your book and your book and your book, but he doesn't talk so much about the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which is quite interesting because there was a court case where two of the writers, and not Henry Lincoln, tried to take Dan Brown to court and try to take some of the money from this, and the court threw it out because they just said, well, this is in the public domain. Yeah, it's been these theories are now so well written about. We can see it through books here on the table, but other books out there as well. That so many people have been talking about this.
Well, because I must admit, it's a case there is. Just to talk about that court case part, because he obviously had read it, because there's certain characters were pseudonyms to the three writers. But when it actually comes to what he wrote about the bloodline, which is only a portion of what they wrote. But you look at Lynn Pignett's stuff, and that's the majority of it. And also, he focuses a lot more on the concept of art. The whole opening sequence is going around Leonardo da Vinci's artwork, which is... I think the only thing that they listed about Leonardo da Vinci was he was one of the past masters of the supposed Priory of Zion. That's it, peaks.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's how that story comes to really burst onto the scene again for another time. Somebody else who's, I think, a real father of this whole mystery is a guy called Tim Wallace Murphy, who very sadly passed away recently. When we went to France, we were very honoured to go and to meet him, in his last days, and he had an audience with us and the group that we went with, and
so lucky,
and he really passed on some great wisdom just about this type of stuff, but other things as well. A great man, but he wrote about the bloodline, and some of his stuff's incredible because he's gone and met people who purport to still, genuinely believe this as a family. There's a story that once he had written one of his books, somebody wrote to him and said, you should have consulted me before you wrote this book. And there was a correspondence backwards and forwards. And Tim essentially said to him, why would I do that? Or, why would we come to this kind of discussion? And the guy said, well, don't you want to know the rest of the story? You got it right. Yeah. But there's just more to it. So Tim and I believe his partner, who was writing with at the time, went and met these people who were living in Scotland in a big mansion house, but actually secretly inside, once you went to dinner with them, they were practicing, a much older type of religion, a much more historic.
Wasn't it more like a Judaic?
Yeah, it's like a Judaic type of dinner that they went to, and that and a number of other stories that Tim will tell you really does make you believe that maybe there are people out there, at least definitely, who believe it.
Yes,
They feel that they are, and there is that argument that aren't we all descendants?
Well, there is the thing. there's a mathematical certainty that all of us are descending one way or the other from Charlemagne, just because mathematically, as you go back, because all of us are a product of two people. So the two people are therefore 4, then 8, 16, and it multiplies to such a degree that we only have to go through so much that the amount of parents we would require is greater than the population at the time.
Yeah.
So yes, we would be all in. There is an all interlinkage that goes on, and there must be people who believe that. I mean, there's another one. Another writer, Hugh Montgomery,
right,
who's very much follows the line of the bloodline, but from the Scandinavian perspective. And so again, about the royal bloodlines coming down for the Bavarian thing. So yes, it's possible.
It is possible. What we must definitely cover is that there was a documentary called Bloodline.
Oh yeah,
which has again. It was a number of years after the Da Vinci Code, so again, it was something else which really brought in a new, a new interest into this mystery. And the Bloodline documentary was fascinating, and it really got chins wagging at the time.
It did,
but I'm going to spoil it.
You have to.
I have to. It has since come out that the main feature in that film, or certainly the second half of that film, it is really a film of two very distinct halves.
Yeah.
The second half of that film focuses on a guy called Ben Hammond, and Ben has come out and said, he's a fake. He made everything up that he put into the documentary. The finds that he said that he found are not there.
Mm.
So what happened was Ben Hammer went on to Rene Barnett's radio show not too long ago, a number of years ago, but it's recent history in regards to this mystery, and came out and said, look, I did this because I wanted to make friends. I was interested in this mystery. I really felt we were going to find something, and I thought that had I come forward with something, other people would come forward, and it's a really, really interesting documentary to watch.
Which one, the first or the second one?
The Bloodline.
To be honest, both of them, isn't it? Because it is two parts of the story. Because there is another theory that even though he's admitted it was a fake, other people have said that he's actually been forced to say that to keep everything hidden, or he is now a member of the. It just carries on going.
It does, yeah. I mean,
sorry, I was going to say you do have to watch the Bloodline to make up your own mind, but also it becomes a piece of history within the mystery itself. Well,
it does, because as I say, it is two parts. It really is, and that first part, when you watch it, is really interesting because it does feature some Prior Zion stuff, which is very interesting. It also features other parts about the bloodline and about the mystery, which lead you to believe that, had Ben Hammer not come forward, it could have been a completely different documentary, and would have been a completely different documentary, which was filmed. And there's still lots of that on the cutting room floor, so to speak. So at some stage, I do believe that we will see it.
Yeah.
Which would be really nice. So to wrap this up, I think the bloodline theory we've covered pretty well, but there are still so many other theories that we need to discuss on Renne le Chateau. So that's going to be the third part. So please like, subscribe and comment. We'd love to talk to you about the bloodline theory in the comments. So please do so, and we'll see you in the third episode.